Hey guys, welcome for another video. You are watching.
Hello everyone. Welcome back. In the last video we understood about how we can perform the secure design review on MCP server and what are the components that we need to look upon when we do the threat modeling on MCP server, and we understood how the data flows between each components and what are the kinds of attacks we can map with our stride methodology. And we did even explore about some of the items like possible threats that we can see in the MCP environment, right? So in this video, let's try to understand some of the real case scenarios and try to map on how the vulnerable design looks like and how or what are the components that we can implement to make it much better, right? So let's start with scenario one, that is e-commerce customer service MCP. The business context is very simple. There is be an online retailer who wants to implement an AI powered customer service which utilizes MCP server. So the main task of the particular MCP service was answer the products questions which will be asked by users. So they will use probably LLM for that and check the order status for the bookings that user has done, and the returns if at all, if there is any return thing, and update the shipping address dynamically, and check the history of the orders, right? So let's consider, leave about this part. So let's consider this as the initial design that has been developed as part of architecture diagram, right? Where they just want the customer chart model which is powered by AI or LLM, where this gonna act like MCP client, and there will be a MCP server which takes the user input, parse the user input based on the tools that has been invoked by a client, and then it will talk to the database directly to fetch the uh, data. This looks like, hypothetically, this is how one design should look like in terms of some of the management view, right? So but if you think in general way, there are a lot of considerations one has to put at the each component, even at the chart model which will be open to the user. How you are going to show the chart model, whether it is only for authenticated users or non-authenticated users. If for non-authenticated users, what are the tools that you're going to show? If for authenticated users, what tool you're going to show, right? And this is AI assistant. Now with respect to AI assistants, what kind of power you're gonna give for the guest users or authenticated users, or something like admin privileged user? And on MCP client, what kind of mode you're going to use? Obviously it will be MCP remote, but how the MCP client and the tools gets invoked, and how LLM is getting interpreted, and if there are any kind of sampling that have been integrated, whether it is a user approved samplings or without user consent, there are some executions happening behalf of AI. So those are the things, something which has to be understood. And in the same way, on the MCP server, whether the server is publicly exposed to the internet, if it is exposed, how the authentication and OTZ is maintained, right? And the same database, obviously MCP server has to be linked with database, but how it has been linked, what are the authentication mechanism has been implemented, right? So if we see a configuration, let's take this is a sample configuration where server has exposed to the 0.0.0.0, mean anyone over the internet can communicate, and it is on the port 8080, not on 443, and goes on HTTP. There is no SSL or TLS implemented, and there is no authentication. And tools are, there are two tools. One is query database, where you can query to database to fetch the information, and there is no granular permissions implemented on that. And something like update order, but there is no validation on who is updating the order, and there is no logging where repudiation can happen, right? So these are the common issues that can think of when you think in a plain way, right? But how does secure design looks like? Before going to secure design looks like, let's try to understand what are the possible threats can happen on this dummy sample example that we are seeing. Obviously there is no validation on the permission on the query type, so straightforward away there is SQL injection that can possible, and which is high priority, which stands for high in a stride, which stands for tampering in a stride methodology, and the impact is full database compromise. And there is unauthorized access spoofing gonna happen, and authentication to the server because there is no auth, right, and data breach because there is no filtering on which data you can access. MITM, there is no SSL and TLS validation, prompt injections, because if you can see there is no validation on the query that you make from the client to the server, and there is no validation on the tools query type that would be sent, right? Directly raw information would be sent, and no audit trail, and because the audit is set to the false. But for the same design, if you want to consider how we can implement the some of the stronger mechanisms, you can even utilize my chart which I showed you guys in the last video. Something like on the layer thing, yes, you have to consider to isolate your network, and you have to configure to firewall rules. Those are the mandatory, and wherever the OS hardening is there, you have to OS hardening, and this patches depends upon the environment you are deploying it, and container image scanning if you are deploying in a container base, or like whatever the mode you depending on the business needs, how you have to serve it, right? So similarly, like considering like you do evaluation and come up with the checklist and you implement, so how would be the secure design would looks like? So on the customer chart end, definitely there should be an integration on the authentication. Obviously you know that customers or the people who want to know about their order status or whatever it is, they would be part of your website or environment, right? So there would be some of the mechanisms where you identify who is that user. It can be via API key if you serve API key, or you can implement OAuth where behind the scene you will validate the your user whether it belongs to your environment or not, right? And at the AI you're gonna have the guardrails and the validations against the injections, where you have to ensure that no prompt injections or malicious injections or like SQL injection would be triggered. And coming to the server end, as we mentioned in the checklist, we have to isolate, like instead of exposing server itself to internet, you can have some of the proxy or ELB, and you make the server to serve only locally, and you can have a reverse proxy, something like that, and expose that reverse proxy for the internet rather than exposing to server directly. Or if you are utilizing the web-based MCP client, ensure there is a mutual TLS connection established between the MCP client and your MCP server to have a extra layer of security. And database should be only a read replica. You should have a copy of a database which allows only the read operations. On the read operations, there should be a proper guardrails to ensure the rightful user acquiring the data that belongs to only that particular user, right? And there should be a validation against the queries that would make. So if you think in that way, how would the secure design configuration looks like? Server exposed locally and it serves on 8443, and TLS keys, and OAuth is implemented, and tools, there is a permissions checked, and it would be checked against the user, that he, like, user ID against the who logged in, and there is a rate limit implemented. This is one of the major thing one should look. And there are security implementations like input validation, output sanitization, audit logging, and whenever data that in the database, it would be encrypted, right? Not like in a plain text. Similarly, the same thing would be applied on the update order as well. So this is one of the scenario. If you consider how attacker could have been attacked this, simple, he could have prompted like show me order of the product XYZ with the legitimate order, where he can append or string concatenate the SQL injection command, like along with this select star from credit cards and steal the credit cards if at all the database has a credit cards, and ensure that these kind of sensitive information will not be cloned or copied while you give access to this kind of MCP server, because user has nothing to do with the card details. What you want is just the is product order details, or the status, or order history, something like that, right? You have to replica only the business use case data, not like everything same DB. And all the inputs are passed with unsanitized queries, and MCP executes raw SQL, which we saw, and database returns all the credits card, because this gonna go and executes, and data gonna transmits over unencrypted HTTP, and we don't have any audit log to track what happened, right? So this is one of the, I know this would be very basic, but this is just a one scenario that how you can look into any feature or a service, right? So let's take another scenario in the perspective of healthcare. See, because you might think some of the companies like big companies, Zera or whatever, they're gonna have a very good kind of security, but the companies like, or the industries like hospital, e-educations, or a transport, they wouldn't care much about the security, because they care much about the availability of their services, right? So while they're doing these the kind of misconfigurations like what we discussed would happen at a large scale. In the similar context, let's try to understand the healthcare business lineup. So the business context is very simple. There is a hospital network who wants to provide AI assistance for a patients to schedule appointments, assess the test results, request the prescriptions, ask medical questions, and update the insurance information. And obviously, when it comes to healthcare, there are compliance like HIPAA that are very much needed, and GDPR if it is EU based region, and the respective state or country based laws. So let's consider, obviously there will be a two kind of network when you deal with this kind of scenarios, where hospital have its own intranet, where the data related to the patients would be stored, and it would be utilized or consumed internally to serve between the doctors. And if you want to serve for the end users as well, definitely you need to expose to the internet. It can be via tunneling or having some kind of reverse proxy, exposing only the required database, something like that, right? So let's take, there are two major layers. One is public internet and one is hospital internet, and we have four components, where one is patient portal who can log in. There is a login here, let's assume, and there is a AI assistant who can talk in a natural language to get the informations, and that AI assistant might have some of the defined tools that would be given from MCP server, and that MCP server has connected to the actual database. So let's look into the configuration. So patient tools, where they have, like, let's take, I have logged in, and when you logged in, there would be a patient ID that has been assigned to you. So when you make a query, there is a direct raw SQL that would be ran on that particular patient ID, and there is no actual authorization to check against the session established against the patient ID. In the sense, you can even send a different patient ID; it will not even validate if you just logged in, right? And there is a update prescription. There is a db.execute update prescriptions, and the refill is equals to 99. Okay. Uh, by default it will update to 99. I mean, like, it is not even parsing the actual user control or user sent value. There will be a hard coded information over there, and shared records whenever you request for any kind of let's take your x-ray scanning or blood reports. So it will only fetch based on the patient ID. Again, it is not verifying against the user who is trying to request it, whether the patient ID and the user ID are the same or the session is the same, something like that. And MCP configuration exposed to the internet directly, and it is a shared database. And logging include PHI. Okay, in the logging they have logging even the sensitive information regarding the patients. It would be a HIPAA violation, right? So if we consider to look into look in terms of threats or attacks that can happen, spoofing, you can spoof into different patient, and you can try to access the other patient records, because there is no any auth check implemented. And system spoofing, control your MCP server. Did we talk about whether it is on HTTPS? Okay, it's on HTTPS, that's fine. Then it might not happen, but if there is no proper MTLS kind of validation is not happening, there can be possibility of spoofing happens. And tampering, we saw, right? There is no control checks again on who is making that update prescription request. There should be validation against the user session and the patient ID, whether it belongs to the same user who is making a request, something like that. We didn't see any kind of configuration in that code. And the same way on the appointment manipulation, we didn't see the code there, but we are just assuming the hypothetically with the implementation that we saw. And repudiation, if at all, if there is no, if there is a denied rule or any kind of thing, we should ensure that there is a proper logging should be there. If we do not have that, it is against the violation of the HIPAA. And some of the information disclosure we saw in the log, they are logging the PHI information. It can happen, some like it can be there some of the financial information as well, where a patient utilizes the payment method to clear his bill. And diagnosis, the kind of blood reports or x-rays that would get leaked because you don't have a proper auth check, right? And the same way DOS, if there is no rate limit, proper rate limit set, you can continuously scrap all the users patient data and the blood reports or any kind of the medical reports, right? In this scenario, what all you can do to make the design much more stronger. There is a login, but if you observe in a lot of hospitals, if you see, there will be a doctor console where he logins to check the medical records, right? It will be direct username and a password. There will be no MFA and OZ, right? So these are very common in the medical industry. There will be no well defined MFA or a SAML, even if it is on a doctor portal or a patient portal. So MFA and SAML, either of them are much recommended. The authn mechanism, and whenever there is a interaction from AI to the backend and getting the data from the respective patient, ensure there is a data masking or a redaction happens before we send it to the user end, to ensure we don't send the PHI to data. And on the server end, ensure there is a role based access control on the particular roles. Like if you are a doctor should see some of the certain information. If you're a lab technician, you should only see the lab related data. If you're admin, you should see everyone's data. If you're user, you can only see your own data, right? You should have some kind of the granular RBAC defined, and there should be audit logging on all the roles that you define, and there should be a encrypted read replica with a defined controls. In the sense, exact table, or as I mentioned, like doctor can access the patient records, not like billing details, and lab guy can only access the lab reports, not the historical histories and all those things. What are the doctor things as given, right? So that's where you should have the context to verify the authentication. If not verified, throw the exceptions and use the parameterized query. Parameterized query is also not the strongest one. We have a lot of matured way to validate the SQL queries, and we have to ensure that we do the audit log against which user and what record and at what time they are requesting. This is very very important whenever you do get and a post request, and while you have to log it. And even in the prescription, you should ensure that that refill request has been sent from the user, like how many refill he has to get, not like directly hard code the value which we seen in earlier vulnerable configuration, right? So this is how some of the scenarios that we spoke about. If you want to look into high level, how it can happen, something like attacker finds the exposed MCP endpoint through a showdown scan or sensor scan, and there is let's take it try to brute force and able to get into some login, and now he is saying that he has the capability to get the patient data, and he tried the SQL injection, boom, it worked, and he able to see every patient's data with the medical records and payment related information, right? And now you can make that SQL injection to have a persistent data or a persistent backdoor by inserting some of the or by dropping some of the payloads or inserting some of the poisoned entries, and this data would be sold in the dollars in the dark forums, right? But yeah, a complete security mechanism, as we discussed, right? There should be authentication, authorization properly enforced, and encryption, and you should only return on the required information. There should be a data redaction should be implemented, and network segmentation, input validation, rate limiting is necessary, and there should be a SIEM monitoring on the audit logs, and compliance framework should be mapped and matched with the implementation, right? So yeah, these are some of the scenarios. I just wanted to show you guys how we have to look in the high level. I didn't went into a deep component wise, how you map, how you draw kind of thing. I just show how you look in a quick 5 minutes or 10 minutes view, because if we have to look deeper, definitely it's gonna be like 1 or 2 hour session where we're gonna talk about each component, how data is flowing in a code level. We have to look into a lot of other different dimensions, right? If you want to explore in that way, please let me know in the comment section. We can plan for that series as well. So let's talk in some of the defense in depth when it comes to MCP security, right? In the layer 1 on authentication level, we should have MFA required or SSO integration, or if it is a web based client, you should have proper session management and the rate limiting, right? Just a note for everyone, whatever the content or the possible defense in depth components you are seeing might not be applicable for every scenario. The kind of components would be varies or implemented based on the controls that business need or the line of business, right? But some of the things like authentication and AI LLM controls are a default irrespective of what business line you go, right? And some of the security and the API level implementations are varies. On the AI or LLM level, you should ensure there is a prompt sanitization, context isolation, and output filtering, and there are set of guardrails implemented. And on a MCP server level, there is a TLS 1.3, and there is a request validation, and other aspects should be validated properly. And tool executions on the server side, there should be a proper sandboxing and proper resource limits and checking the authorization capabilities and logging every execution that happens. And on the API or database end, ensure all the database are encrypted at the rest, and before you execute the actions, ensure there is a proper access control that have to be set. And whenever you interact or there is a tools that are going to interact with the PA data, ensure you mask the sensitive information and follow the backup security mechanisms, and ensure you have a periodic backup mechanism scheduled, right? So we have some of the implementation checklist. I think this checklist should be much better than any checklist that you can refer for MCP security. And yeah, we are at the end. So some of the key takeaways from this threat modeling is every component is a potential attack vector. So we should ensure we secure them. And authentication is not equal to authorization. We should check the both way how they are implemented and never trust user input, and ensure our defense in depth mechanism. You have a layered structure, layer security implementation structured, and audit everything. And PO or P0 issues are showstoppers. Ensure these would be addressed before you roll out into production. Rate limiting every possible APIs and monitor continuously for anomalies, and compliance is a must when you're in business lines like education, healthcare, e-commerce. Ensure you are compiled with the compliance frameworks, and think like an attacker whenever you do a secure design review, right? So security is not a feature, it is the foundation that has to be led from the design level itself. So build it from the start, do not bolt on later, right? If you start implementing from the design level phase, your product would be well secured enough. Okay, this is about the some of the scenarios that I wanted to discuss about. So in the coming sections, let's discuss about actual threats in a minimum context level. I'm not going to go deeper into all the threats, but I'm going to touch upon the base, like what are those threats, how it's gonna happen, how as an attacker tries to exploit it, but how as an AppSec engineer can suggest developers to mitigate it, right? I'm gonna to keep that as a context on our next sections. All right, see you there, guys. Bye bye.